very good evening and a very warm welcome to this panel, which is the last for the day. And since this is the last for the day, we'll probably speak forever, because this is the panel that deals with everything. It's the weaponization of everything. It's the opportunities that abound around everything. And it's about literally all the races, the conflicts, the contests, the competition that are underway in the world today. This is the panel, what I call this is the everything panel. And you guys can bring your dinner plates and sit and join us if we continue too long. But we have been given an hour, and we'll try to condense this very rich panel into very succinct conversations with an amazing set of speakers. We have Professor Cho Wong-hee, who's the Professor for Indo-Pacific Studies and Head of the Center for ASEAN-India Studies at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. We have Professor Li Wei, who's a full professor at the School of International Studies at Renmin University of China, Beijing. We have Mohammed Suleiman, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute, Washington, D.C. And of course, we have Dr. Huda Al-Kazemi, who's the Associate Vice Provost of Research, Translation, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship at the New York University, Abu Dhabi. So let me start with Mohammed Suleiman first. And Mohammed, let me ask you this. Since you work at the intersection of technology and geopolitics, Mohammed, are we at the onset of a new great tech game? Is the world and the world order being shaped by the battle for technology? Or, as we heard in the previous sessions, the dependencies are going to be a dampener? The counterpoint to that is, perhaps the dependencies make it an imperative for all parties to free themselves and in some sense, add fuel to this new contest.
Samir, thank you for this question. Dr. Abtisam, the entire team at the center, thank you so much for this wonderful event and the kind invitation. Always a pleasure to be back in Abu Dhabi. Samir, to your question, few things I wanna notice here. One, we are going into an era where we have a big competition over who is building the new system for the 21st century. And this system I call the compute system. There's going to be powering the entire application layer of AI and new technologies. This is why you see export controls as the new norm between the United States and China, from semiconductors to critical minerals. So you're already seeing an ecosystem that's unfolding between the United States and China, and a lot of countries are trying to make a choice. Is our choice to be part of the American stack or the Chinese stack, or can we build a niche for ourselves when it comes to the competition? In the case of the Gulf specifically, you're seeing the Gulf is pushing for more of becoming part of the American stack. Actually, I'm not really sure if my comms is working correctly. It's working.
No, it's working.
Perfect.
It's working.
So you are seeing the Gulf countries are acting as a force multiplier for American AI stack. That's a solid choice for the UAE, for Saudi Arabia to be part of the American AI, offer this as a service for emerging markets. There are other countries that do not really have the energy, the capital, the political commitment to AI to make the same choices as the Gulf states. There are some other countries that will be left behind. And you see this in emerging markets, you see this in Africa, you see this to some extent in Latin America. But you also see countries like India trying to chart their own course, building the India stack, trying to be their own identity in this great tech competition between the United States and China. This being said, we also have to recognize that those two countries are the elephants in the room. They have an outsized role. Those are the countries that they're producing and designing chips. Those are the countries that have the biggest energy production capacity. Those are the countries that have the talent. And because of that, that will always make those two countries capable of shaping all the trends that we're seeing, from choke points to talent flow to capital, and on top of all of that, the conversation around governance of technology and AI.
So is it a contest, or are we headed to a tech conflict?
We had the President of the United States a few weeks ago talking about G2 dynamic with China.
But you know, China doesn't believe in G2, they believe in G1.
The President of the United States decided that G2 is the framework for engagement with China, where we're going to be discussing all these questions, from export controls to critical minerals to AI and trade.
Okay, so look, you dodged the bullet, but I'm going to come back to you on the Gulf question. I think that's an important question. And Huda, I'm tempted to come to you, but I want to save you for a little later. Let me turn to Professor Li Wei, and let me ask you, since you heard our American speaker give you a view from Washington. Let me ask you for a view from Beijing. The great game that is underway, a contest for corridors, which is the Northern Sea route, which is the new mineral routes, the Lobito corridors, the IMEC, which has been proposed by certain actors. Of course, you have a race for semiconductors and rare earth. And by the way, you guys are sitting on top in some of those races, right? So how do you see this playing out?
Okay, thank you very much. Before answering your questions, I would like to express my gratitude to the host, Emirates Policy Center. Although it's not my first time to be here, but I'm still very impressed by the prosperous cities and the prosperous country. And also, I really appreciate the great efforts made by UAE to be not only the economic hub in Middle East, but the hub of the thoughts and ideas. Regarding your questions, the new conditions in the world is the weaponization of the economy. To leverage the corridors and the semiconductors and tackling is a bad thing, but it's a bad thing. But China, indeed, I know you asked this question, what's the attitude of the Chinese side? China, these years, China indeed make use some of the economic statecraft to realize its diplomatic aims, but we learn it from the United States. In the past 7 years, from the 2019, the United States waged the economic war against China, including the trade war, financial war, and the technical wars. For the purpose of some countermeasures, China has learned some experiences from the US to how to make use of the economic statecraft as some kind of measures to response. But I would like to say China is the largest victims of the economic war, of the economic coercion. So we know how to use these economic tools with prudence. We know which aim, which target we would use the economic power for this target. So that's my answer regarding the weaponized economy. Yes.
We heard in one of the panels earlier today, in fact, on the China panel, we heard the speakers, one of the speakers very eloquently explain that while the US was looking at military and strategic aspects of global partnerships, the Chinese were looking at the development aspects of partnership, which were always meant to be inclusive and meant to include everyone.
Yes.
Mohammed just mentioned that some people will be left behind in the AI future. Does China see it in the same way, or do you believe the Chinese AI growth can actually serve the global south, can help partnerships in Africa and other countries benefit from Chinese technology?
Yes. To me?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Regarding the AI, I think there is a G2 structure, China and the United States. European Union and Japan are not on the table. So just the two countries, China and the United States. So for the third parties, they can benefit from the competition from the US and China. We do not want a hegemonic structure in the AI. For example, I use two cell phones. One in China, I use Huawei, but in the United States, I use Apple. So the competition is a good thing for the third parties. We do not want a hegemonic order, even in the AI. So the third parties should welcome the competition between the United States. That's the essence of the market, right? Market welcome the competition.
So we should play the competitors.
Yes.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Yes.
I think
so. Do not rely on a single powers.
Okay.
Yes.
Hoda, let me turn to you here. This is a good segue to you, Hoda. Look, you work on a vast array of technology questions and I'm going to come to you a little later on drones and some of the advanced, dual-use technologies and how that's playing out. But how does a region, that's the Middle East, and a country like the UAE, which has always prided itself in being autonomous in terms of its foreign policy, economic policy, and had maintained a very carefully curated balance in being a trading hub, a technology hub, an ideas hub, an economic hub. How do you manage this? How are you assessing this competition that's playing out?
I think, Samir, as you just well said, I'll just want to start by thanking Professor Al-Kitbi, Ibtisam Al-Kitbi, and the APC Center as well for building pathways of this dialogue in UAE. And to answer your question, UAE has been always about neutrality and being a platform of stabilization to the world, not just to the economic value that they are representing for what they're having on the map. Diversification of investments across different future economic pathways is something that UAE has always aimed to do. And there, I would say, consistently is doing this through this new AI race. And it's not just AI race. UAE realized that if you invest in AI, you have, as His Excellency Omar Al-Ulama said this morning, you have to invest in the whole value stack. You have to invest in semiconductors, you have to invest in the new pathways of minerals, you have to invest in stabilizing the world, because you can't just build a data center within a region and forget about building new economic pathways in Africa or in other parts of the world, or stabilizing regions like South America, or building collaborative pathways with China, with Russia, with other as well partners globally, as well as the United States. We are as well, as what Professor Wei said, we're a big fan of open source development, not just from an investment stack, but also on a technological stack. Most of the open source tools that UAE built for AI has been pushing to the market as well. DeepSeek was one of them, I think, from a Chinese perspective. But that also translates to the consistency of that messaging. It goes from the multi-layer kind of approach that exists across way.
Hoda, this afternoon we heard at the China panel, and by the way, Ibtisam, I must congratulate you for these fantastic conversations. Well done and more power to you. I actually was really enjoying listening to some of these discussions today, the European discussion, the China discussion, the Russia discussion. I think you've brought all of them to this room, and thank you very much for doing that. But again, in the China panel, I sensed, and maybe I'm just overreacting, but I sensed that there was a frustration in the Chinese side that the folks in the Gulf have chosen America as their tech partner. That when, and Mohammed said this too in his opening remarks, that the UAE and others act as force multipliers for American AI. Now, how do you respond to that frustration or question or position?
I think UAE has always been about being strategic and not being bubbled into an echo chamber. And the echo chamber of the world is that we have to pick a side, and UAE would never pick a side. And I think in terms of investment, we're always for diversifying investments across different portfolios. Yes, for certain kind of current use case scenarios that we're working with the United States, but that doesn't mean that we're not working as well with China on other parallel pathways of deployment, for example, of use cases of AI on other aspects. If you looked at the AI campus that exists, for example, in the IFC in Dubai, there are some leading Chinese companies that are also well stationed in that kind of a cluster. We have as well Chinese companies stationed that are working on use cases on financial markets and AI that are as well here in Abu Dhabi. So I think we are trying to maintain this kind of open market policy when it comes to the wider investment clusters of frontier technology and not just AI. And regardless of what's being echoed in the wider global chamber, being there for all of the allies is something that UAE has always invested in.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you about Global South and UAE, and I want to come to the Global South and the US as well, Mohammed, then I'm going to come back to you. But let me first turn to Professor Wangi. We also are using this particular hour to discuss the competition over the trade routes, the corridors of commerce, of of prosperity, but now also of conflict and contest. And in some sense, everyone is looking to, the new word is diversify. The word is resilience. The word is de-risk. Everyone wants multiple choices for everything, right? So like we heard from Huda. Now, how do you assess, because I remember one of your works was on the limitations of the Indo-Pacific architecture and the Indo-Pacific strategy. That was something you wrote on some time back. How do you assess the viability, the importance of a project such as the IMEC? Such as, is it necessarily a competition to the BRI? Is it a complementary offering to what exists today? And how does it enhance economic and security propositions for the world?
Thank you, Samir. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to Dr. Etesam for invitation. Well, I was nicely surprised that I'm the only Korean speaker here in this fantastic and wonderful forum. I mean, given the very close and solid relationship between UAE and South Korea, I think I feel that we need to make a greater effort to make presence in this important debate. Well, Samir, regarding your question, well, if you look at the past trajectory of BRI, I think it's already more than 10 years, right? I think with all the problems and criticisms from mostly from Western countries, like the issue of transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness, I think my assessment is that BRI has achieved a certain level of success. For example, you have a greater number of countries from the global south joining BRI. And also, BRI has made, China has made a lot of kind of institutional mechanisms on the broader BRI projects. So in that regard, I think China achieved quite something. In that regard, in that sense, I think if you look at the founding members of IMEC, I think there are, both the elements of the competition and kind of hedging the bets as well. For example, I think, simply, India is one of my priority, so I'm looking at quite following the India's kind of perception. And a couple of weeks ago, I was in New Delhi for a conference, and my sense was that there is a very strong enthusiasm about the future prospect of IMEC. So my point is that the IMEC is kind of simply saying India's answer to BRI, I guess. So with the support of the United States and to a lesser extent EU. But I think if you look at other participating countries of the IMEC, like UAE and Saudi Arabia, I think it's more of the kind of hedging bets rather than outrightly confronting in China. So in that regard, I think you have multiple layers of kind of strategic elements embedded in IMEC. And also, this is a very ambitious project that includes a lot of mega issues. So I think one of the future prospects of IMEC is that you have to wait and see. First of all, I think the sustainability of this project is very important. And also, I'm not, it is a matter of kind of a question. I think in order to implement the IMEC initiative according to the regional plan, I think you need to have sustainable source of financing, and also you also have to consider some of the geopolitical uncertainties. For example, if you are able to connect and open up the ports in Israel, I think the ongoing Gaza conflict should be somehow stabilized. And also, the relationship between Israel and Saudi is also in question. So I think there are a lot of uncertainties. But I think from the perspective of UAE, I think this is really a smart choice. I think the IMEC would provide a lot of strategic space. And also, this morning I heard that one of the three pillars of the kind of foreign policy of UAE is to enhance its strategic autonomy. In that regard, I think as a small country in this part of the world, IMEC serves the UAE's interest very much.
South Korea is a electronics powerhouse, is a digital powerhouse.
Right.
How are you navigating the China-US, what do I say, contest, conflict, competition, collaboration? Actually, they're collaborating in a number of areas, both the US and Chinese companies. How is Korea positioning itself in this new game?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a daunting question. I mean, the electronics, I mean, more specifically, semiconductor chips. So we have two world-leading companies, Samsung and SK Hynix. But the problem or the challenge is these two South Korean chip giants are exposed both to Chinese market as well as American market, right? I mean, Samsung and SK Hynix are dependent upon U.S., the patent technology, equipments, design technology, things like that. And also, as a market, U.S. is very important. But China is also very important. I mean, SK and Samsung are operating 5 production facilities, NAND flash, memory chips. So Chinese market takes 40% of their market share. So kind of you are in a kind of onerous situation where the Americans push greater export control and things like that. But yeah, so in that regard, I think these two companies should have to navigate their kind of way. But I think it also provides a lot of new windows of opportunity for Korean companies. For example, Samsung and SK Hynix, these Korean companies are kind of facing a fierce kind of competition from Chinese competitors. So a side effect of the kind of the U.S.-China tech war, from the perspective of South Korea, I think we have some niche areas of opportunity. And so I guess the strategy of them from the South Korea is that, first of all, I think we are try to strengthen and expand partnership with the United States, because I mean, U.S. is most important in terms of market and technology and equipment. And the second one is the diversification. Try to diversify other partners where you have the greater convergence of commercial interests as well as the political kind of trust. Countries like India and UAE are kind of trusted partner. The third one is manage. We have to manage. I think we can't move away out of the current kind of geopolitical location. So in that regard, I think on political level as well as on the company level, we are trying to manage, stabilize relations with China.
Professor Lee, you want to come in? Yeah.
Regarding the IMEC, the Indo-Middle East Economic Corridors, I have something to say. I don't think the Chinese government and the United States will compete on the infrastructure building in these areas. I don't think so. I consider that we have competition in AI, in geopolitics, but I don't think we will have some competition with the United States in the corridor building, because I don't believe the United States will really like to invest in these areas.
Correct.
Because the infrastructure building needs the long-term investment, need the patient capitals. But the Western companies have no patience in this area. So if the West countries and the Western companies really want to invest in the infrastructure building in this area, Chinese government will welcome. The more the better. The more the better. So I don't think we have.
Look, that's an important point, Mohammed. I'm going to come to you on this. I'm going to put you on the spot. But look, there's a truth bomb there. And Professor Wongi also said the same thing. BRI achieved success simply because it was the only game in town. It was the only infrastructure project that was connecting the global south and the southern markets and production centers to the world. In some sense, the West had counted itself out of the game. More specifically, the US was out of the game. Now, Biden administration, of course, announced this with great fanfare. But Mr. Donald Trump may have a very different view. Will he have the appetite to actually invest in a project that might be decadal in the making, might take a decade to make?
Surprisingly, I don't really have that much to disagree on, but let me add an American view on corridors. So what's a corridor? We're trying to add a framework to existing patterns of trade, which exists in the case of India, Middle East, Europe. The trade volume between India and the UAE is about $100 billion. Between India and Saudi Arabia, $40 billion. Between India and EU, collectively, $120 billion. That trade is taking place. What you're trying to do with the vision of a corridor is adding either local understanding around this trade, adding diplomatic muscle to it, making sure that we have standards. I'm not going to use the word reduction of tariffs because this ship has sailed. No one is going to be discussing that. But on the idea of having some sort of commonality, having some sort of standards, having some sort of alignment on volume of trade, intervals of trade, making sure that we have the port's capacity that will handle increased amount of trade. And this is what you have seen between India and UAE. For you to go from 40, 50, 60 billion dollar to 100 billion dollar, that meant you need to invest in the logistics between India and the UAE. You also see the same thing when it comes to airways. So to your question, I agree, there is not really a competition. We actually have a lack of investment infrastructure, period, because that was supposed to be something that countries would invest in 1990s, 2000s, before everything became very much centralized around American trade and American centrality to free trade in the 2000s. Right now, you are seeing different centers of trade that are emerging, that creating these sort of trade networks around themselves. And this is why this India, Middle East, Europe corridor that exists today is different than BRI, because this is, I would say, this is an argument I make in my book, West Asia, that this is all because of the rise of the Gulf as a central node between India and Europe. And because of that, you see how the airways, you see tourism, you see services. And on top of that, major investment in infrastructure from basic AI, from very sophisticated AI build out to other supply chains. So to the point, we need to make sure that we have more trade routes. We have to have more corridors, so you make these trade patterns much more, I would say, lasting, have an impact, and bring all these countries together.
Okay. Mohammed, let me turn to Hoda very quickly. The IMEC also has a digital component. We are also looking at connecting innovation, connecting data, connecting entrepreneurs, startups. Is this something that excites your tribe, in some sense, those who are investing in future enterprises?
100%, and I think, Samir, to this point, I think that IMEC is a complementary structure to the PRI, because as you focus on maybe the upstream kind of supply chain kind of questions on the PRI, within the IMEC you focus on the midstream and the middle stream kind of powers rising. What happens to innovation if you want to have connectivity and mobility across microsystems and across innovation structures that are happening within data, for example, creating data bank, getting the DPI structure that is being built in India, for example, transported as world-class technology to Rwanda, to world-class kind of notion to other parts of the world, so you can fast accelerate digitalization elements to other kind of emerging economies. In a world where we have crisis, a massive crisis in the world, and we know that today we are standing at 3.2 growth projection for the global economy. The lead economies that are leading this growth, 40% of it, are coming from emerging economies. And those emerging economies, on the contrary of what we are trying to understand, they are actually within the spectrum of the Middle East, of India, of China, and as well Africa. Now I feel, and I think positively, that the IMEC kind of partnerships on the innovation structures will be coming up with maybe multitude of other similar innovation kind of pathways. And this is what I think we wanted to say, that we don't want to create silos, but we want to create this kind of connectivity structure that exists in between different islands, because you are trying to build a value stack of interoperability of opportunity and not end up in a polarized world developing something cutting edge, a quite cutting edge new economy in one part of the world and denying access to that economic value to the rest of the world.
Look, as we move to the second half of this discussion, I thought I should maybe perhaps pose a couple of questions to all of you, and then we will open it up to the audience thereafter. The first, of course, is, as the Indian Foreign Minister stated in one of his interventions, that the world is very obsessed with the part of the periodic table that no one paid attention to in the classrooms. When we were being taught the periodic tables, all those metals that we ignored are today the most sought after in the 21st century. So we are all obsessed about a very new part of the periodic table. They are now residing in very interesting new geographies, from Latin America to Central Africa to, of course, Southeast Asia and other parts. There is a new race to acquire control over many of these resources. The question to all of you generally, and I can start with Professor Lee first, that are we going to see a new extractive race where we are essentially looking to garner control over resources? Or are we going to see this new moment build value for the countries where these resources reside? So can the age of rare earths be different to the age of hydrocarbons? And can we actually build value for the countries and geographies where we find some of these important metals?
Ocean?
Yeah.
Ocean.
Sorry?
Your question is concerning on the ocean?
No, it's for you, Professor Lee. Yeah.
So, China is the largest trading nations in the world. So we have very high stake on the open and free ocean order. So I'm not the maritime expert, but I know that some countries is weaponized the ocean transportation. So, but we must I must remind all of you, we are the largest. China highly rely on the ocean transportation, but we have no single naval base overseas. So China want to divide, that's China's benefit, that's China's interest. We want to define an open and free and sustainable the ocean order.
So what you're suggesting is that when people talk about Chinese having military bases overseas or having military capabilities overseas, it's all myth?
So we have no naval base outside. So,
but you have capacities to project power?
Yes, the aim is for Taiwan.
Okay. Okay. But my question was on the resource one. Maybe I'll turn to Huda on that resource question. I think you took it to the oceans. My point is, Huda, as we start extracting copper and other metals and heavier forms of rare earth, are we going to see a different economic model? Or is it going to be basically, as Mohammed mentioned, that the G2 will be the winners and everyone else will be left behind?
I think, Samir, we're trying to look for the synergies in the room. Yes, we've seen in the past, I think, 5-7 years, this kind of mineral wars that are happening. When we started denying maybe AI access to microchips that are being used for quite advanced processing, what we've seen in terms of retaliation from nations that know that their power within minerals, like China, for example, is that they're starting as well saying maybe we'll increase tariffs over gallium or granarium, which they are like getting maybe around 90% kind of a global dominance around. But the reverse question that we started hearing on the scientific community and industrialized community, maybe we should start experimenting with other minerals, with other type of minerals than the current stack of minerals that exist on the value chain that we could use for even energy kind of production. Why are we just counting the lithium, for example? Although the case of lithium, we have a higher, I would say, a better de-risked model in it because you have 5 countries in a global production kind of cycle. So today, because of this kind of global tensions that are built around minerals, where we see as well wars being waged against, minerals that are being used in semiconductor lithography, and we know very well that there are only 2 countries in the world, Ukraine and China, that are producing specific mineral on that. We started being mindful of the world polarization and the risk that exists against nation when you are trying to industrialize based on this kind of single choke points. So I think today there is like an active conversation on what if we started diversifying away and we starting pushing and incentivizing nation to think of their own sovereign mineral kind of a stack and start as well diversifying the innovation cycle around that kind of mineral stack. That conversation, I think, is being delayed over 4 decades into the making. But it's a positive, synergic, silver lining kind of point out of the whole tension spectrum that we're having. We're seeing people working on small, effective energy reactors that are going to have maybe dual-use structures. So
technology could be a solution in managing the mineral dependencies and diversifying the mineral bases required to produce solutions.
100%.
Mohammed, how does US view this scramble for new metals? You guys wanted to take over Greenland recently, right? So, like what's happening there?
Samir, I'm not going to have a conversation about Greenland. That's a different one. In all seriousness, I mean, as you know, the numbers are very, very stark. 70% of global mining is China's hand. 90% of processing is also Chinese. So clearly, we are in a position where China dominates the entire mineral stack. And this is very important for EV batteries, for every sort of technology that's very much reliant on those sorts of minerals. On top of that, we also have the rare earth minerals problem. Those are 17 minerals that are very rare, and China did a great job, I would argue, in terms of dominating the mining and the processing of those minerals as well. So you're in a position where this is becoming more of China's imposing their own version of export controls through the rule of origin, so 0.1% of any technology that's reliant on Chinese mine-processed critical mineral is part of the Chinese export control. So clearly, we're in a position that's very, very different than before. We have United States, of course, dominating the semiconductor ecosystem through export controls under the Department of Commerce, and you have China dominating critical minerals, and this is why you end up
But Mohammed, Chinese export control is not new. If you remember during the conflict with Japan, what happened, right? The Japanese were brought to their knees over a decade ago with rare earth controls, right?
I agree with you 100%. I think the new part of it is how expansive the Chinese export control system is. Also, the way that you are seeing 2 different export control regimes coming out of Beijing and Washington head-to-head. Interacting now in a global level in 2 very important components of the global economy. I don't think we have ever seen this before. Even during the Cold War, the first Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union, the global economy was not really that integrated to have that sort of J2 talks or trying to figure out a way to have an off-ramp. This is where we are right now, and this is why it makes it extremely difficult to have a wiggle room between the United States and China, because right now we have export control regimes where you have to actually get a license to prove that the other party would not benefit from your own product. So how other countries would be navigating that? We are seeing this happening on live TV right now.
So export controls are no longer meant to keep the world safe. They are actually used to harm harm your competition. I think that's the way it's being weaponized now.
Traditionally speaking, think about the idea of export controls. That has been something the United States has used against the Soviet Union when it comes to missile technology through some of the Eastern Bloc countries back in the 60s and 70s. And then we kind of let go of this post 1991. We do not really have such a robust export control regime. Right now, this is a new norm. Whenever you are a new company, a new startup, a new technology venture, you have to figure out.
Sign on to a.
You have to figure out who's your consumer, who's your consumer, who are you selling your product to, where are you sourcing your own critical minerals from, who exactly is part of the ecosystem that you are building. So even if you are building a very small thing that's part of this machine over here, you're already going to be exposed to a huge number, so many number of regulations and policies for you to make sure that you're aligned. And this applies if you're operating in China, or if you're operating in the UK, or if you're operating in the United States.
Okay. Professor, you wanted to come in and then I'll come to you.
The recent Chinese announcement of export control of critical minerals and manganese. Of course, as a result of the bilateral meeting with Trump, China deferred the implementation. But I think when China announced that export control measures, if I share Korean perception and sentiments about that, we had a great concern and frustration. Actually, this is not, as you mentioned, the first time, right? In 2017, we started to have, not official anyway, but informal economic sanctions, and we suffered quite a lot. Actually, that was the start point. Reckoning that, for the last 30 years since 1992, when we established diplomatic relations with the PRC, for the last 30 years, South Koreans swim together with the Chinese in terms of economic and trade relations. But in 2017, all of a sudden, China tried to punish us because we didn't behave as it expected us, right, with Americans. So,
but Professor, today Donald Trump will punish you if you don't behave like he wants you to.
So we are kind of sandwiched, right? So that's kind of dilemma. So that's one of the main reasons why we try to start the economic as well as diplomatic diversification. Of course, still we have to maintain relations, economic and political relations with China, right? But this kind of situation is very kind of frustrating. So we'd like to expand our diplomatic as well as economic kind of horizon. So in that regard, Southeast Asia and India and key partner countries in this part of the world, I think that's very important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hoda, you want to come in quickly? Because then I want to ask my second question to all of you before we...
Yes, I think we need more neutralizing power agency in this whole spectrum. Because if we live in a world where you have export controls, in the US it's a growing field. You have over 1,800 entities registered under the commercial entities in the US, and in China it's now 1,100, including AI, encryption units, and all of other kind of advanced chips infrastructure. And even if you're standing today to build with the big top 10s kind of hardware companies your own AI accelerators, you're having different tiers. You're having at least 3-4 tiers of structures, and you will never get tier 1 or tier 2. You will get tier 3 of these kind of AI chip infrastructure unless you build them closer to home. And this is what we are trying to advocate here for, having that kind of hub structure that is available globally for people to build across different platforms.
But my final question to all of you before I open it up to the audience is on the weaponization of global financial systems. We saw the SWIFT system, for example, being weaponized immediately when the Ukraine crisis unfolded some years back. There is also the big question on some of the infrastructure institutions. And I think, Professor Lee, you have written on the competition for global institutions between the US and China, right? The strategic competition over multilateral institutions. Now, how do you create a financial architecture where values can flow irrespective of conflict. We have seen that the SWIFT system has become subservient to those who built it. How do we keep payments and financial flows sacrosanct? And how do we maintain the integrity, Professor Lee?
Okay. I think the United States is the only country that can weaponize the financial system.
No, Professor Lee, let me ask you a counterintuitive question. If the Chinese own the SWIFT, would you never weaponize the SWIFT? Can you say today that when the Chinese build their financial transaction gateway, they will not use the financial system to punish countries such as they use rare earths?
Right now, we have no such capacity to punish others by the financial power, because we have no financial power. It is the United States, the US dollar is the hegemonic currency. That's why, so we know that according to the liberal philosophy, the absolute power will lead to the absolute corruption, right? The US dollar is the only hegemonic currency in the world. So we should check and balance against the US dollars. That's why Chinese government want to promote the RMB internationalization. That's why Chinese government supports the euros. That's why Chinese government try to promote the currency cooperation in East Asia. So we, from Chinese perspective, we need to build a multi-currency system, not a currency system based on US dollar hegemony.
Okay. Mohammed, people have been talking about the weaponization of the SWIFT, right? You heard this with Ukraine conflict and many other previous times. And as the world moves to digital currencies and digital payments, are we looking at an opportunity here to de-risk from the traditional payment gateways to new architectures? And is that something that US thinks about as part of their geopolitical attributes today, that there might be a move away to newer modes of transactions?
Excellent question. Let me respond to the first question that you posed to my Chinese colleague. Whoever controls a platform will always control the rules around the platform. That's basic rules of power and of great powers. That happened with Britain during the time when they dominated the telegram lines. It happened with the United States when the United States dominated the telephone lines, and later on the internet in the 1990s. So this is not really a new phenomenon. Let's talk about where we are today in 2025, 2026. Clearly there is disfranchisement when it comes to the traditional ways of doing finance. That exists specifically because of the US response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and kicking out the Russians out of the SWIFT system. So what does it mean? It means that you have a lot of countries, a lot of players, a lot of non-state actors looking for other ways of doing business. So far, there's not really a basket of currencies that are capable of absorbing the current level of trade volume. We didn't see that. Like, you and I, Samir, have been talking about this for so long. That has been a subject of conversation for the past 18 years, and even specifically increased after 2008, the financial crisis. So far, we do not really see a clear alternative to the dollar. What you're going to see is few fragmentation on the edges. You're going to see digital dollar, you're going to see crypto increased in volume as a way of doing business outside of US banks. So you're going to see a lot of more platforms working in the alternative, what I call like digital assets.
So the gray economy is likely to blossom? Or do you think, is it the gray economy that's working outside the dollar platforms? Are you saying state actors will now also use that same medium?
I think I would say it's still within the gray economy space. It's still within the remittances, migrant workers, of course, organized crime, terrorist organizations, any entity that's under sanctions. I think those are going to be the entities that are going to be much more drawn to use, I would say, some of those digital assets outside of the US umbrella, outside of the US Treasury, which is extremely dominant, even in the cyberspace.
Huda, crypto, I think crypto is something you have closely examined. Now, the potential of digital currencies, creating alternate frameworks, pathways, is it still marginal? Or are we at the point in our innovation cycle where these could become significant opportunities and options?
If you asked me this question like 10 years ago, I would say no, but now, yes. We are at really positive inflection points where we see crypto leading economy. To answer your former question, in the middle of a crisis, in the middle of tensions, how can we make sure that financial systems don't collapse, financial systems don't take biases towards one system against another? And I think different countries build their own system, India, Brazil, China, and as well the grander SWIFT system. We've seen more and more jurisdictions where they have this kind of dual compliance structure, where even in the UAE you have a system that can accept the CIPS from China, that can accept SWIFT. So in order to make payment structures, it just happened. Just I think last month we've seen Saudi Arabia pay China and like Chinese currency for their oil transactions. And I think we live in a world today where stable coins, UAE talked about stable coins 4 years ago, regularized it, made sure that we have this kind of flexibility and regulation structure to attract stable structures across the universe here to UAE, and as well being competitive to other Asian hubs. I would say Asia is always pioneering in this, like Singapore and Hong Kong. But it's not just about making the legal jurisdiction happen. It's about building a scalable adaptability in terms of this case. What we are, I think, in fear of within the crypto community is having this kind of behind-the-scene hedging structures to a system that we think is decentralized, but because of the involvement of the institutionalized funds that exist in the different structures, and they're moving in to buy more and more of those crypto equity across the markets, then there is a high risk of also manipulating that kind of what looks like a systematic free system, which it's not at the moment a systematic free system.
Professor Wongi, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, a short comment on the Chinese intention to replace the American-dominated financial system. So according to the power transition and hegemonic stability theory, the financial hegemony comes at the last stage of power transition. First, manufacturing and maritime and military power. So in that regard, I think China is not currently in position to challenge, but it is clear that China tried to bypass the SWIFT, the American-dominated financial system. For example, I don't think that the trade between China and Russia is based on dollar. I don't think the trade between China and North Korea even is based on US dollars. So it's a non-dollar barter or non-dollar kind of trade. So in that regard, I think, and also if you look at the agenda of the BRICS, I mean, de-dollarization has been a prevalent topic, discussion. What I want to talk about the Chinese kind of the manganese and the critical minerals and even maritime. Yeah, I don't think that China currently. I mean, you have Djibouti, right? Djibouti, yeah.
It's a logistic.
and also many
Logistic base.
yeah,
Just
potentially dual-use deep-sea ports. Yeah, that's true. And also, I mean, last week I was in Manila talking about we have today big conference on South China Sea, and yeah, I observed that. I mean, the Chinese colleagues' kind of tone and argument has been a little bit changed. I mean, they're not anymore emphasizing the legal basis of their South China Sea claims. Rather, they talk about the history, talk about the inability of the China to respond to the American kind of military kind of pressure and things like that. So it's not their China's choice. It's just a response. You have to respond to this military pressure. I mean, for example, the U.S. Secretary of War has just recently announced the Philippine task force and things like that. So yeah, I mean, so in that regard, I think from a Korean perspective, right? We are maritime trading nations, so sea routes throughout the South China Sea and South China Sea is critical, right? So we need to. We are having a lot of concern about what China is doing. Yeah.
Let me invite Mohammed Baroon to pose this question to the panelists.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for keeping us awake towards the end of a very intellectually charged day. You've talked about the weaponization of AI and the G2 particularly as a major way of hegemony within the AI. AI is a very user-centric, without users there is no AI. So, and the global south has something between 75% to 83% of the global population of the earth. So how does hegemony or how hegemonic is hegemony in the AI?
Okay. I think that's a very fair question. End of the day, the use capitals of the world are not going to be either Washington, D.C. or China. And how does that politics play out? And that's the question I was asking about G7, that don't be smug with the data centers you own, because those who will use the AI may belong to very different geographies. So you have to win their hearts as well. The second intervention from the audience is from Marwan Al-Balushi. Let me invite him to speak.
Hi, good evening, everyone. As usual, I would like to thank Dr. Ibtissam Al-Kitbi for this opportunity. My question is for Mohammed Suleiman. The Gulf, especially the UAE and Saudi Arabia, is investing heavily in rare earths and minerals. And also, we are partnering with the US. But how can we avoid getting sucked into the West confrontation with China, especially when we consider our rather balanced geo-economic position between the two superpowers? Thank you.
Okay. So I think these were the two questions from the audience. We have 4 minutes. I'm going to come to each one of you, a minute each as we close. AI sovereignty, is this a chimera, or will you have to balance the markets that will need to build AI? So in some sense, how do you create that relationship between the global south and the big boys, the G2 as it were, that we heard today? By the way, I never saw any panel with so much enthusiasm for G2 as in this. So well done. But Huda, let me start with you. Does the consumer have the final veto, or is the consumer with no agency?
So I think the AI use case, to Dr. Baharoun kind of point, we live in a world where it's about adaptation. It's not just about who's developing, who's pioneering and building the chips or building the machinery. It's about also who's pioneering and building the mixed grid energy structures, who's pioneering and making sure that it is accessible to the wider supply chain. Because if you don't have that global connectivity and mobility to your technology, you are in restricted markets. Today, I've seen and witnessed lead AI companies come and launch their products from Dubai, from the Middle East, because they want to have global efficacy towards what they're developing globally. And I see that being the norm for the next few decades, which is something that is also very striking and analyzing, are we achieving the ROI kind of anticipations out of AI? This is one of the grander conversational points that we have today. We anticipated over, I think, 70x growth on different markets, and especially in manufacturing units and hubs that doesn't have a human connection in there or man in the loop, but we're not seeing that yet. So it all depends, I think, on the sovereign development of AI assets, I would say, end of the day.
Mohammed, you have a specific question for you?
Let me answer the AI question first.
Quickly.
So quickly, I want to differentiate between AI applications and AI infrastructure. I would say right now we're in a phase where AI deployment is the most important piece of AI. This is why we always talk about the United States and China. We need anywhere between 200 to 300 gigawatt of compute in the next 5 years. Which are the countries that are capable of deploying this compute for infrastructure applications that all these users in Indonesia and in India and in Africa would use? This is where the United States and China are important, and this is why the Gulf is important, because they're able to be part of the infrastructure layer of the broader ecosystem, because this is very capital intensive, very energy intensive, and requires you make a bet, make a choice on which one is your AI partner on the chip side of the ecosystem. Okay. So this is on the AI infrastructure. On the critical minerals question, listen, we are in a struggle for figuring out what's a proper ecosystem for critical minerals. There's a space for everyone, specifically in Africa, for the United States to work with Gulf partners to find new deposits of those sort of critical minerals, and you can elevate the Gulf countries' value proposition in the entire processing and mining of critical minerals. So there's always win-win. And it doesn't mean competing with the Chinese. It doesn't mean that you have to choose on the critical mineral side between the United States and China. I think there's always a space
on
for
the AI infrastructure, you have to choose between the two, but critical minerals could be an open market competition. Huda, I have to conclude, but Professor Lee, I'm going to come back to you if I have a minute. Professor Lee, final thoughts.
The final comments on the G2 structure of in AI areas. I argue that the G2 structure provides more opportunities rather than challenges for the third parties. In the future, on our table, maybe there are two computers. The one use the DeepSeek, the other use the ChatGPT. You can choose. You can choose. Yes.
Okay. Professor Wong, final comment from you.
Yeah, two quick comments. First, I think AI dominance, the race for AI dominance is the one of the key aspects of the geopolitical contestation between US and China, but that does not mean that we don't have any space to exert our own kind of presence. So in that regard, I think, throughout today's discussion, I noticed that there is very high level of enthusiasm about AI, particularly in this forum. And from Korean perspective, I would like to say to UAE friends, I think it is very important to collaborate with friend you have strategic trust. I mean, all of this geopolitical competition, technology is important. So in that regard, Korea is a good, would be a good partner.
This is a strong pitch for Korea as a partner. Final thoughts.
And I think we are fixing the supply chain, bringing resources closer to sources, and Bolivia and Chile and Brazil and Africa is quite important for them to develop as well the technology.
Look, I think that this was a fantastic panel. We are closing it now. Well done. I think eventually the future will be based on one single word: trust. And trust alone will decide where the G2 and G2's plans, proposals unfold. But let me tell you, there is a third way and many are working on it, which is neither G1 nor G2, and it could be sovereign AI. So let's applaud the wonderful panelists for their interventions. Thank you very much.
Great as always.
Great job.